Thank you to everyone who's taken time out of their day to attend our dispute management webinar on the topic of what happens when projects go wrong. The webinar is designed to last around 30 minutes, and I'm delighted to be joined by two of my esteemed colleagues. Despite how it looks, we haven't coordinated our dress sense. I've got my colleague Bradley George here, who's going to be kind of taking part in today's discussion, as well as Guy Seaward. Hello to both of you.
Hello, Jacob.
Hello, Jacob.
So, as I mentioned, today's theme and topic of the webinar is on dispute management and avoidance, particularly kind of focusing on the kind of things which become really important to businesses in AEC when a project goes wrong. So first of all, once again, thank you to all of you who have attended today. We appreciate more than you'll know how challenging things are at the moment for everyone, particularly just when it comes to kind of getting access to diary time from people like you, because not only are we competing with your work priorities at the moment, but also your kids and stuff going on at home. So really hope this is a good use of your time. We've got 3 speakers from 3 separate locations. So I'm crossing my fingers and hoping all of the technology is reliable, but if at any point it doesn't, then please bear with us. There's a little bit of housekeeping. There's a chat facility within the webinar, so if you've got any questions at any point at all, then please just put them in there, and if they're quick, we'll answer them straight away. If not, we'll make sure to cover all of the questions thoroughly at the end of the webinar. In terms of the format for today, we're going to go through dispute management, which uses some learnings which we've picked up through working with some of the leading law firms, both in the UK and the US legal industry, as well as using a report which we've kind of researched from Arcadis, which is the annual report, Arcadis Complete, which basically takes an overview of all of the disputes happening within the construction industry, the causes for them, as well as some of the solutions which some companies are taking advantage of. So we're going to cover dispute management within the construction industry. First up, we're then going to talk about the role of email in disputes. And then kind of our bias, if you like, as an email management software company, we're going to be showing you the solution which was effectively developed by an engineering business, Arup, who some of you may know, because they very quickly recognized that their inability or challenges to be able to reliably find project data was having a massive financial effect on the company, as well as an effect on the kind of stress levels of the leaders within the business. So yeah, I'll get straight into it. The first thing really is we always like to understand a bit more about those who are attending today and what made you attend. So there's 4 options here. I'm just going to launch a poll, so you should have that come up in front of you, and I will kind of share the results as they come in. But the typical reasons we see for attending these kind of events are to just generally, you could be reviewing IT systems. A second option, you could be hear how other businesses are addressing things like dispute management. It could be that you're struggling with email or are having a particular issue on a project at the moment. The final option is just that you're kind of interested in Arup. We sometimes have people, particularly who have worked at Arup before, who kind of attend events for that reason. So interesting results coming in. Around 80% interested to hear best practice on managing risk, as well as a good interest in Arup. So thank you again. I'm just going to end the polling now in about 5 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, end polling, and I'll share the results just there. So hopefully you will feel like you're in the right webinar. So, in terms of disputes in construction, for those of you who haven't, I'd really encourage all of you to look at the Arcadis report on disputes within construction. This looks globally, but we're using the specific research around the kind of work done in the American construction industry. And I won't go through. I won't kind of go through everything on the slide there. But what is obvious from looking at just the sheer volume and scale of disputes within the industry is probably something which all of you know, is that the value of a dispute can be particularly high, relative to your size of business, obviously, but the cost and time taken in disputes can be massively debilitating to a business. We're going to talk about some of the solutions and ways companies are trying to resolve disputes in a proactive way before they happen. But we know and recognize that even with our technology, and even with using some of the best practice across industry, there's a human factor involved in any dispute. And naturally, that kind of relies on both sides understanding where each party's coming from, which we'll talk about. What I was interested in, and which you may be interested in, is some of the causes for disputes, which was errors and omissions in contract documents, parties not necessarily understanding their contractual obligations, so maybe not being in the most informed position to be able to enforce things like penalty clauses, but also not always knowing fully what we're agreeing to. And then the final one, which feels to me the kind of easiest one to resolve, is poorly drafted or unsubstantiated claims. And I'm sure everyone on this webinar at some point has been on the receiving end of them, and that is certainly something which goes to the heart of how you're managing your project information. If you've got good project records, reliable project data, substantiating claims and bouncing them and arguing them back becomes a lot easier. And I'm sure you've all worked with businesses who are, shall we say, kind of less organized than you might like. So that's the kind of global picture in construction, with a particular focus on North America. So some of the current themes, really, which hopefully kind of all of you relate to a certain extent, is that I was interested to learn that the US is among those leading the way for proactive dispute prevention, and I'll talk about some of the kind of tools and techniques which companies are doing at the moment, because the US is certainly kind of a step ahead of the UK on that front. Change control is a massive problem. Those of you will know and recognize that, but we do know the construction industry is quite good at admitting problems, but not necessarily that effective at doing something about them. I think, we've all fallen into a trap before of repeating the same mistakes, and it's about time there was a better and more sophisticated way to manage scope change on project, because that's the bit which is normally quite informal, and you probably know the people in your business now who manage scope change really well and know the people who don't. I'm going to try and not mention the C word too many times on this webinar, because I'm sure you all get lots of news and have had enough of it already. But we know that winning and delivering projects on time just got a whole lot harder. And we'll talk about, I suppose, some of the natural impacts of that onto projects, particularly when they return to some sort of normal. The obvious one is that timeline and cost overruns are going to become fairly unavoidable, and all of us are going to kind of hope for some understanding partners and clients during this period. From the Arcadis report specifically, we know that access to justice is fairly biased against small to medium-sized firms who don't potentially have like a legal team. So we're going to share some advice again, which we've picked up, which we've kind of learned from working with people in the sector on ways to simplify contracts, take a kind of proactive approach to disputes, as well as kind of making sure your own house is in order, so you don't kind of warrant your own sort of full-time legal resource. But that's just kind of, I think, a known fact, really. So why is risk more relevant now? We naturally want to solve the problems of today as well as helping companies in the future, and it won't come as any surprise to people that the projects which they've agreed and put together based on there being a kind of consistent supply of labour, materials and everything going according to plan is out of the window now, and everyone is having to adjust their expectations on what's realistic, including us at Arup. naturally, there's a substantial amount of risk for the industry with regards to schedules, cost, and quality. If everyone's kind of scrapping around for materials, for example, quality could suffer, and schedules are naturally going to, because I mean, I've got my son's birthday on Friday, and if it's difficult to kind of have a present arrive for then constructing a multi-story office building is going to be pretty difficult. I think we all hope, as I mentioned on a previous slide, for some really understanding clients, and everyone's interpretation of unforeseen circumstances being reasonably, I suppose, with a healthy dose of common sense. Taking a kind of proactive look at this, we did a talk last week with Rob Horn, who's a construction law specialist, and the big piece of advice which came out of that, which some companies are already doing, was triaging projects. So what do we mean by that? Well, that means looking at your 50, 10, 20, however many projects you as a practice run, and thinking, well, which of those has unresolved claims for extension of time? Which of those has got outstanding change orders on? And which of those has out-of-date schedules? Because at some point, we're going to have to get all of that in order. And at some point, we're also going to have to probably justify that the projects weren't going to be delayed anyway. Anyone who disagrees with this, kind of feel free. We're really sharing what we've kind of learned from other companies in the sector. But the key thing there, which comes across to me, is the importance of getting your documentation and projects kind of in a good order, and having a really strong audit trail to be able to argue any potential kind of case or problems you might have in the future, because there will be companies who are just in chaos at the moment and probably aren't quite thinking about that. They're not thinking, when can we get an up-to-date schedule, when can we make sure all the change orders are resolved, and how can we prove that the project was kind of in fine working order, on time, on plan, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And important record keeping is going to be really important, because it's even more difficult now to get the status and information out of people's heads and into something which we can actually use in a practical way. So triaging projects, thinking around those three areas of change orders, out of date schedules, and unresolved extensions of time is really critical to coming out of this stronger. So some of the solutions which we were kind of particularly interested in, because these do apply globally to a certain extent, but certainly on the topic of early dispute resolution, it is working in practice in North America. It probably won't come as a huge surprise to people that the vast majority, over 70-75% of disputes are resolved after they've happened, but before they actually get to court. And it's normally through party-to-party negotiation, which I think is kind of trying to agree something before it gets to a much more expensive kind of level, really. Early dispute resolution. Now, some of you will know something about that already. Some of you may not. The use of dispute review boards is becoming a lot more common on medium-sized projects. What that means is everyone on the project agreeing to appoint a number of consultants, kind of 2 to 3 specialist experts on a project, who will make independent decisions, who take the time to understand the context of a project, which a lawyer often wouldn't have the opportunity to, but all of the supply chain on that project agree to abide by the decisions made by the dispute review board. Basically meaning you've got somebody, 2 or 3 people, consultants on a project, which everybody respects, understands that they know the detail of a project, and will make decisions which mean that the project can move on in a quicker way, rather than us spending weeks and weeks arguing about it. The US is leading the way at the moment for project information management, and more participants are actively using tools around BIM and project information management for the prevention as well as the resolution of disputes. So what that means is having visibility of awkward conversations before they become really awkward, or if we're needing to retrieve all of the emails against one project, or the documents against one project, being able to do that quickly. And I think if anyone's on this webinar now thinking, well, if I had 5 people on a project and I had to retrieve all of the correspondence against that one project, if that isn't an easy process, then the business is exposed to a certain level of risk. So the kind of couple of solutions there, really, one is the use of dispute review boards, which I certainly think is worthwhile considering on medium to large projects. And project information management, I think, is a kind of fundamental, which should be applied across all of your business key disciplines, really. And naturally, during this kind of weird time, some businesses will be taking it as an opportunity to evaluate how they organise their information to come out of this period at least more aware of how they can make their business leaner and smarter for the future. So in terms of dispute avoidance, mitigation, and the ability to resolve disputes, a key thing which we know is important and which we know some businesses are already doing now is putting together a dispute management strategy. So that isn't just about resolving disputes, because it's quite easy for people to write down now, well, how do we resolve disputes on projects? I think the two more challenging areas are, how do we mitigate those disputes before they get to a really serious point, and then how do we avoid them moving forwards? I think everybody kind of understands very well the value an expert witness can deliver on a project, but we probably haven't always written down and spoken and had kind of preemptive, proactive conversations with parties on a project to understand that they know exactly what they're agreeing to on the project. So kind of regurgitating a contract in layman's terms, and we're seeing a rise of a 500-word contract in the UK industry, for example. But importantly, I think in the past, as an industry, we've kind of put plans and pricing together on the basis of everything going according to plan, and we haven't necessarily discussed up front, well, if XYZ happens, then if XYZ goes wrong, then this is what should happen next, and this is kind of where the responsibility would lie. And having those conversations beforehand, you tend to get a much better kind of human response from people in terms of understanding where you're coming from. But if you're discussing this at the stage of procurement and contract, it also protects your own business. So businesses now are starting to document, well, how do we try and avoid disputes, and changing how we procure and contract, and making sure that everybody understands exactly what they're agreeing to is important. Having reliable project data, in the UK we had the Grenfell Tower tragedy, which was basically where nobody knew kind of what materials were being used and why they were being used. And I think that's a really important point. If you don't know why something's been agreed, or why something's been decided, or why something's delayed, then trying to kind of defend yourself in the future naturally becomes a lot more difficult. And mitigating disputes really relies on the ability to identify key issues, which comes down to visibility, which I think has become a bit more challenging in the recent weeks. So that's kind of the bit on disputes in construction generally. We're going to now talk about the role of email in disputes, and then show you some software. Now, naturally, just to, I suppose, kind of caveat that, we're not expecting anybody on this webinar to have a list of systems they're looking to invest in and implement overnight. But we are, by the sheer number of people on this webinar, we know that some businesses are using this as an opportunity to look inside their business to understand how they can deliver projects better after this and reduce the level of risk they're exposed to. So today's really a chance to, I suppose, learn a little bit more about this topic and us, and we'll talk more about some of the kind of next steps which we could take with you at the end. But I'll hand over to my colleague Bradley to talk through the role of email in disputes.
Thanks very much for that, Jacob. So onto the role of email in disputes. So one myth in the industry is that emails are not legally binding, and that simply is not true. And what we find is that emails can actually hold businesses responsible for their actions. And in the case of a dispute or a litigation issue on a project, emails can eventually act like mini contracts. And what we find is that we don't often realize how important emails are until we have to go back and find one. And now, whether this is a business critical document during an ongoing project, or whether it's having to go back on a project that was completed some time ago to see who authorized what change or who gave permission to who. And because email is the biggest form of communication on a project, it also is the one thing that everyone tends to manage differently, as well as in legal disputes as well. So if, for example, you have an organized project manager who is keeping good, consistent records, a dispute can actually be resolved before it gets to that claim stage if things are being managed consistently. So there are a lot of different ways of managing email, and a lot of companies have different ways of managing correspondence, emails, documents, drawings, etc. They're often stored on a server or in the cloud, but what we find is that everyone still manages information differently. Some may create their own subfolders in their own Outlook. You might have a shared folder structure, some create their own rules, and some may just leave things in their inbox. And what's important is not necessarily the email itself, but the information that's contained within that email. And what can happen is that when staff go to find where that email should be, it just simply isn't there. And some companies think that if it was up to maybe their staff to file emails, they wouldn't do it, and maybe wouldn't do it consistently. And as a result, then the business is in at risk as important information can be stuck in people's inboxes, or duplicate copies can take up storage on servers. So what we find is that when emails are consistently organized across the company and important correspondence is being managed in the same way, what it ensures is that there's no risk of information becoming lost, and you're essentially just wasting less time day to day within email. So, have you ever been in this position? I think it might be right in assuming that maybe a number of you may have been on either the receiving end of either one of these phrases, or maybe the one giving it out. And what we find was, so the impact of getting into situations is that each one of them in some way slows down the progress of a project, or in a worst case scenario, can even lead to the loss of business. And when correspondence is managed consistently, this is how we avoid getting into these situations and avoid asking these phrases, and it just generally makes your day a whole lot easier there as well. So onto Mail Manager. Mail Manager is a solution developed internally by Arup Engineering around 10 years ago, because they knew they had a real issue surrounding emails. Picture 16,000 employees, everyone managing information in their own different way. An important correspondence was at risk of becoming lost in individual inboxes, and people just wasting day to day trying to find important project information. As well as that, Arup were presented at a lot of risk, and they essentially needed something to help them manage all of this correspondence. And so Arup thought, well, what if their project teams could find any email on their projects in seconds without people having to spend time filing? And so Arup looked around at what solutions were available, and they couldn't find one they were happy with, and so they built their own and created Mail Manager. And so Mail Manager was never intentionally created to be sold, but because we are working with a number of different companies with similar issues, they became quite interested in Mail Manager. And fast forward to today, it's used by over 2,000 companies worldwide, and it's about over 55,000 users across the architecture, engineering, and construction sector there as well. And on your screen, a few, just a portion of our US customers currently using Mail Manager at the moment. I gather quite a lot of you must recognize a few of the names on the screen. What they all have in common, that they're all project-based businesses. They're working in high-risk environments, always looking at technology as a way of improving their day-to-day routine. So on your screen, a few of the problems that we typically solve here with Mail Manager. And now I think what we're going to do is we're going to get a quick poll to see what everyone, all of you watching, feel are the most prevalent issues at the company. I think it's just come on your screen now. I'll give you a quick few moments to have a look. In case you may not know what some of these may mean, lack of control over project information. What this essentially means is that if you are in any position where you need to have visibility on a project across the company, having to look at all that correspondence, there may be a lack of control if everyone is managing information differently, and you haven't got that visibility on maybe any changes that are being made during during the during the project cycle there. Information becoming locked in people's inboxes when people essentially aren't filing away consistently. And what that means is that information can't be shared by anyone who would need it. Wasted time spent looking for emails, fairly self-explanatory. I think we all have to look for emails on a day-to-day basis, and that just means that time is being wasted. You're not using that time on your fee earning work essentially. And risk of losing sensitive information, what this webinar is essentially about. If you're at risk of not having those project emails consistently being kept in an accessible location, it just creates risk if you needed to go back on a project or on a dispute there as well.
And just to add to that, there could be, for all of you attending, there could be many different kind of systems or processes which you've got in place for managing email, whether that's kind of public folders or you're kind of using a kind of maybe a bigger document management system to help in this area, or just everyone's kind of maybe filing in their own inbox. What we do certainly see on a day-to-day basis is that none of those systems are ever really used. So many of these kind of may apply. We're just going to close the poll in about 20 about sort of 5 or 10 seconds. So last chance to vote. We'll share the results with everyone as well. So you can obviously see how this applies, how your business relates to others. So as Bradley mentions, we've got wasted time, risk, and everyone's on there. So just going to close the poll now and share the results. So what's interesting there is that staff being overwhelmed by email overload, which I think is probably, again, reasonably prominent, because I'm certainly in the category of people, and I'm sure all of you guys are, where you're receiving more emails than you ever did, because there's naturally a lot less kind of face-to-face conversations. So this would be what's also interesting here is that there's kind of about 40% of respondents who are concerned with information being locked in individual inboxes and consistency or lack of consistency of filing. So thank you all to who have kind of taken part in that.
Yep, thanks so much, Jacob. And that's it for me. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Guy, who's going to give you a rundown of how Mail Manager works in practice.
Guys, so if you just press share screen, you'll everyone should be able to see your screen in a moment.
Thank you. You can see my inbox okay?
Yes, I can.
Good stuff. Hello. So I'm going to be showing you a live demonstration of Mail Manager. It resides here in your ribbon. It's a simple add-in. It's these 3 buttons and these 3 drop-downs. I'm going to show you how we organize our inboxes day to day, how we file our emails, and then I'll take you to the search tool and show you how you can go about avoiding a dispute before it even happens with relative ease. So I'll go to this email from Aisha right at the top. Now, I've already spoken to her about this and I don't need to reply. After reading it, I might move on to the next email, and the danger of this being locked in my inbox remains. It's not always immediately clear which emails you might have to rely on in the future, which emails are important, which ones might mean you can avoid a dispute. So I'll close it, and a prompt comes up, and this is what gets people filing. This is what drives consistency, turns it into a habit, ensures the rest of the project team are going to be able to see it in their day-to-day, but also that if you ever need to rely on that email again, you're going to be able to access it really easily. Mail Manager uses a very simple piece of AI, machine learning, and it's clever. It learns where you file your emails from different people and tells you where they should go. It also looks at the subject line and the body of the email to see if it can pick up any project numbers, project names. On this occasion, it's recognized that me and Aisha work on ACOM together. So I'm going to file this. That goes 2 places. It goes to Mail Manager, so those people that need to see it will be able to. And it also goes to a folder called Filed Items. That is so that I've got full functionality within Outlook. It hasn't disappeared, hasn't actually gone anywhere, but we like to keep your inbox streamlined like mine as a to-do list, as opposed to a filing cabinet, if you will. Now, if you have a look at this email from Aisha, you can see she hasn't mentioned ACOM once, and she hasn't mentioned any project numbers, project names, consistent with external companies not knowing your internal procedures. But Mail Manager is going to pick up that that's the project we work on together and send me in the right direction. Now, I could right click to file like that, or I could select it, file that way. But what we found with these manual steps is that people might not file. The risk remains that it could get locked in the inbox or deleted, which is exactly why we developed the problems. Now, another key feature of Mail Manager is how it deals with outgoing emails. Typically, companies don't file sent emails. You'd have to be a really dedicated filer to send an email, go into your sent items and file it away. So Arup thought, what if there's a way to file by replying? I'm going to tell Alex to go ahead. Now, this might not seem like the most important email in the world, but I might need to rely on this in a month. I might need to rely on it in a year. So I'll press send and prompt comes up again. This time it's a different project folder because I work on a different project with Alex. I'm going to press send and file. That files my email from Alex and my response, two filed in one, without giving it any thought. The prompt gets people filing in a couple of days. And the great thing about it is, in regards to disputes and future claims, our clients rest assured that the emails are filed as they come in and go out. It gives uniformity. A problem that we faced was that we had some people who were the best filers of emails in the world and other people who were the worst. The good thing about Mail Manager is it just turns everyone into the best filer, regardless of what they did before. I'll take the search tool. It's this magnifying glass up here. When I speak to clients, this is the part that they'd miss the most if they didn't have Mail Manager anymore. We think this is the unique bit. Typically, people have only been able to search what's in their own inbox at any one time, and this is different. It's a Google-like search for your project emails. If you have a look at the bottom left-hand corner, we've got over 500,000 emails that have been filed in my company. Some I'm involved in, the majority I'm not. That's across multiple projects. So let's say you need to find one email where a specific word was mentioned. Let's go find one of the mini contracts that Bradley mentioned. If I type in earthwork, it pulls up 17 emails out of over 500,000. The search has been tested. It works on the functionality that can search through 1 million emails in 2 seconds. So it should never take more than a couple to find what you're looking for. Admittedly, I cheated there, and earthwork is a very specific term. So let's find a more generic email. I don't know much about the one I'm looking for. I know that it was sent in the last year. So I'm going to change the date range at the top. We're down to 127,000 emails. Still too many to search through. I know that it was about an invoice, so I'm going to put that word in here. And now we've got 15,000 emails that have been sent in the last year and mention the word invoice. I know there's an attachment, so I'm going to click yes. We're down to 4,000. I know the end of the gentleman's name who was involved in this email, and it ended in Shire, so I'll put that in there. And here it is. You can see with limited information, a few simple steps, I was able to find this email with relative ease. You might want to, or one day you might have to, find all the emails on any given project. Now you're filing consistently against all projects, you can do this. So if I put ACOM into here, one of our bigger clients, we've got 1,200 emails. This is all the interaction between us and ACOM. All I'm interested in looking at is what Georgina was talking about. So I'll put her name in here. And we go from 1,200 emails to 27. Now this is all the interaction between Georgina and ACOM. See what emails she's been involved in. I know there's an attachment in the one I'm looking for. It gives a level of project visibility that wasn't necessarily available beforehand because you can see all the emails on any given project rather than just your own. I'm going to show you a relatively new feature now. It's going to take a moment to load up. It's what we call a social map. It gives a visual representation of who the loudest voices are in a project. So that's 1,200 emails in a map. Looks a bit confusing and a bit scary to look through. And this isn't something you'd use every day, but it's extremely useful if someone starts a project late, leaves a project early. So let's say I was starting this Acon project late and I came, I've got this map of emails. I need to get a bit more specific. I'm dealing with renewals. So I'm going to put that word in. It's going to specify who's been talking about what. The bigger the box, the more conversations. So at a glance, I know that I need to speak to John, I need to speak to Reese. Stephanie would be a good person to speak to. And the search on the left makes it incredibly easy to find out what those conversations were about. So that's all I was planning on showing you in regards to the prompt and the search. When projects go as planned, then all is well. But when they go wrong, emails become critical. The search tool and the prompt has the capability of turning a really, really stressful situation into one well, into a non-situation. You can avoid disputes before they arise because you've got access to all of your staff's emails. That's all from me. I welcome any questions.
Thanks, Guy. So a couple of questions have come in, two which, for those of you with the ability to kind of ask questions on the bottom of the Zoom window. So if there's any questions at all about kind of how you might use this, then feel free to put them in there. We've had a couple come in on how to file emails which are already in your inbox. So just before we answer that, if there is any emails filed in a folder on your server or somewhere at the moment, just by adding that folder to Email Manager means they'll start to appear in the search. But you'll all have thousands of emails in your inbox which you might wish to kind of organize, which Guy, you can take that one.
Yeah, so just for clarity, how do we file an email that is already filed in my inbox?
No, so if an email, so if you're, if you're looking to kind of start using Mail Manager, what do you do with your thousands of emails in your inbox unfiled now?
Apologies. Right. So this is a question that always gets asked with during implementation. There's a couple of different ways to do this. That's kind of at the discretion of the company. On one hand, we've got a bulk filing tool which allows you to do it really easily. Just as an example, if they're already in folders. We've also got companies that choose to put all of their historic project emails into one folder, label it Life Before Mail Manager, and then that's searchable in the search tool, and you can access all of those emails really easily.
Any other questions from anyone at all? There's a separate question which has come in on migrating thousands of historic emails, as well as another one on duplication. So what happens if 10 colleagues get CC'd into an email?
Yep, good question. So if you just follow the screen, so I did that quite quickly, but I just went into tools and locations. So most of the time people don't come here, but this is just to show you how and where and why we store them. Mail Manager uses a concept of collections. That's a way to group data. So you'd have a collection for projects, and on the right, you'd have locations for each project. Going into Fitzroy Square, our fictional project you saw me file into earlier, this is where the emails get saved in their native format. The native format is a MSG file, and that's important. It means we don't change any information in the email, and we don't host any of your data. It's all within your own company infrastructure. So if you use a server, SharePoint, Viewpoint. In regards to deduplication, when an email gets filed, it gets stamped with a code, and that code is always unique to that email. The code is the date it was sent and the time, right down to the second, the name of the sender, and the subject line. That eliminates duplication because it's always unique to that email. So if me, Jacob, Bradley, all got sent the same email at the same time, we all filed it using Mail Manager, it would look like we had all filed it, when in fact one copy got saved. Saves about a third on storage.
Great, thanks, Guy. There's another question. I'm trying to be very careful pronouncing a name because it can be a quick way to offend someone. So please forgive me, Dijonez. Dijonez. Anyway, so there's a question on how can I file emails currently sitting in my archive on Outlook. So I'm not 100% clear in terms of where that archive is, although if you've got emails in Outlook now, you can use, there's bulk filing options to allow you to file from Outlook into Mail Manager, into wherever you want, and then Mail Manager can search them. If you've got emails which are kind of in an archive somewhere else, then if perhaps they're a folder somewhere, then you can add them as a location into Mail Manager, which Guy has just shown, and Mail Manager will then start searching and indexing them. The key thing here is that everything you're looking at, you could be using and set up within kind of the next half an hour. It's really, really straightforward. So if there is the opportunity to kind of try this out as well. Any other final questions at all? So what we're going to do is I'm just going to take over the screen now, guys. So if you just press stop sharing, then so again, that kind of brings us to the end of today's webinar. Really hope some of you have found it useful. In terms of what happens from here, there's a couple of options, and I think we're trying to do all we can for our existing clients at the moment, because I'm sure all of us are going to remember the businesses who helped us, as well as maybe conversely, potentially the businesses who didn't, and we certainly want to put ourselves into the first category. What that means is existing clients who maybe on this webinar, you've got the option of free training as well as free licenses for staff who maybe weren't using Mail Manager, but you've got kind of no real visibility of what's going on with them in terms of correspondence at the moment. Conversely, for those who aren't using Mail Manager, we'll be sending out details in terms of how you can organise a demonstration for your own company, which allows you to see how Mail Manager would work and compares to your kind of current way of working as a bit of a benchmarking exercise. And then we encourage all businesses after that to trial this and to see if people will file through it, understand the return from there. We're doing a number of things for clients who are looking to proceed with this, which also includes effectively the next 3 months use of Mail Manager free of charge for any clients who are kind of using Mail Manager for the next 12. So, but importantly, I think that kind of starts with a conversation over whether this any of what we've shown today could work for you. So we'll be sending out details for a demonstration event. We're doing a bunch of stuff to help people at the moment, which includes free trials of the software, as well as a kind of heavily incentivized option to proceed. So thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you very much.